Okay, guys, welcome to another episode of Food Friday. For anyone listening outside of the group, every Friday we go over something that's food related, nutrition related, just so that we are all top notch with our education on food, the things we eat, and why we eat them, and then hopefully debunking some myths along the way. This is our second one of the series. Any feedback is always appreciated. If you're watching on YouTube, then leave a comment. If you're listening to us on Spotify, then head over to Instagram, Sean Kenny underscore, and drop me any questions you have. And if you're listening from inside the group, then message the group and let's create some conversations if you have any questions. So, carbohydrates today. Carbohydrates is a topic that you can speak about for weeks on weeks on weeks on weeks. There's so many rabbit holes to go down, and there's so many different ways that we can go over carbohydrates. So I'm going to keep this one somewhat split, and if we have to do a part two, part three, part 10, then we will do that because again, it just goes on forever. So I'm just going to try and keep it to somewhat the basics. And as I go along, I might try and think of some bits that is commonly asked when it comes to carbohydrates. But first of all, it's going to be a little bit boring, so strap in. So carbohydrates to start with, what what are carbohydrates? What is a carbohydrate? What does it look like? And the reason I added this in is because I feel like I'm hoping that it's going to take some fear away from what carbohydrates are. Because, carbohydrates get such a bad name that, they're terrible for you. They're going to kill you. They do all these horrible and awful things. I think something, if we just visualize and just picture what carbohydrates are, they're just sugars, okay? So carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So these are so what we call monosaccharides. I appreciate not everyone's here for a biochemistry or a breakdown of a carbohydrate lesson, but just to make it super simple, like guys, these are just little molecules. We call them monosaccharides, mono meaning one and saccharide meaning sugar. So one sugar. So we've got glucose, fructose, and galactose. And these are literally what carbohydrates are made of. So when we get longer chains of carbohydrates, which we call disaccharides, which is two for dia, and then we go on and on and on, it's all compounds of these three things. So it'll make sense as we go along. But this is all carbohydrates are. It's just these three little things. And depending on what the food is, it will break down into these three things. So there's nothing to be scared about. All things that our body needs to function. Um, and yeah, as I said, essential to the body. Right. Now going on to the next bit. So this is where it gets a little bit boring, so strap in. I'm going to try and power through this as quickly as possible. So when we come to monosaccharides or just simple sugars, let me just move my face so you can read it as we go along. Sugars or monosaccharides represent most basic type of carbohydrates, making them easy for your body to digest and providing quick energy boost, commonly referred to as simple carbohydrates or simple sugars. They can be found in a variety of foods, including fruits, honey, milk, candy, or food, sweets, sodas, juices, cookies, cakes, and pastries. While some foods containing simple sugars are healthier than others, whole fruits stand out as some of the best options because they're rich in fiber, vitamins, and minerals. And in contrast, where you have sweets and fizzy drinks and stuff, they can contain high amounts of added sugar. So when we talk about um, natural sugars and added sugar, you know, the reason why, so fruits have, and this is why I go back to this first slide and why I added this, is that, it's all the same stuff. So, fruits have the same sugars, um, and it always gets broken down into one of these three things. So it doesn't mean that it's always, so different compounds and different foods will be broken down into different. Sometimes it might be glucose and fructose, it might be galactose and another one. It was always broken down into one of the three. So, even fruit has sugars, right? Everything, a carbohydrate is a sugar. It's always going to be broken down into a sugar because sugar is what our body uses to function. So the problem is, or where the problems lie, and where all of this comes out, all of this bad press comes from carbohydrates, is that the free sugars, okay? So, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but the reason that fruit is better than some of these other things is because, you do have your vitamins, you do have your fiber, and the fiber actually helping you to digest and control that regulation of the sugars that are released into the body. So that's why fruits aren't as bad, but again, fruits can also be quite easy to digest. and sugar goes into the system regardless. So that's just a little bit on the simple sugars. Starch, again, something that you probably heard of before. So starch is a type of a complex carbohydrate. So what's a complex carbohydrate? Complex carbohydrates is when, if we go back to these, is when these start forming together and we start to create some other compounds. So essentially, all it is that chains and chains get built up, and then we start to create some different chains of foods. And obviously, once those are connected, they create different compounds. But then what has to happen? Our body needs to then break it down so then it can be used for energy, right? So again, it's always a process. It's always kind of things going through our body. But at the end of the day, it's going to be those three things. So your body must break down starch into glucose, which is our form of sugar, which is this one here. So we need glucose to function. That is our main fuel source, glucose. Um, to utilize it for energy, starches are present in various foods. So you get starches in fruits, vegetables, grains, and legumes. Again, a lot of these times you'll see these things cross over. So, fruits, monosaccharides, but also disaccharides as well. So, um, so similar to sugar, starch can be found in both nutritious and less healthy foods. White bread and white rice are considered refined grains. So those grains have actually been processed, and some of the compounds have been removed. So therefore, we lose some fiber, vitamins, and minerals, because they've been bleached. Whereas these whole grain versions, or brown bread or whole grain, still have all of their fiber in. So that's why they're a little bit better than the ones that have been processed and bleached, because they still have that fiber within. So therefore they don't create as much of a spike. Um, and that is in there as well. So yeah, so their fiber is still there and their nutrient content is still in there. So it's going to help you feel fuller for longer. But we're going to go over that now anyways. So when we come to fiber, so just like starch, fiber is a complex carbohydrate. The difference is that this doesn't get broken down. So um, fiber cannot be digested. When you consume fiber, it travels through your body. It aids and slows down digestion and helping you feel full. So again, like sometimes when we say about trying to prevent snacking, we say having 30 grams of protein for every meal. And the exact same goes for carbohydrates. 30 grams to 60 grams of carbohydrates, especially carbohydrates that have fiber, or high amounts of fiber. This is going to keep you feeling fuller for longer. So you're reaching for less snacks. And everyone always forgets about the carbohydrates. Imagine cutting out carbohydrates, having loads of protein, and still feeling hungry. It's because you're missing out on the carbohydrates, okay? We need carbohydrates, guys, whether that's for energy and brain function or just helping us from snacking later on in the evening because we haven't had any carbohydrates and our brain's going, where the hell is our fuel to function? Okay? So, yeah. And again, look, here we go. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, all of the same stuff. Because at the end of the day, it all gets broken down. So when we talk about carbohydrates, it's usually the processed stuff, the bleached stuff, the white breads, the white rices, and um, I don't know where I was going with that one. Any of the processed stuff. Whereas when you have whole foods, there tends to be enough fiber in there to kind of balance things out. Also, interestingly enough, it's not all white rices. You definitely do get a scale of white rices, and basmati seems to be the best of them all as well. So, there's still research going on. And again, as I always say, nutrition is a science and it's always evolving. So, if at any point I say something wrong and there's evidence to go against it, then I hold my hands up and I'm here to learn something new as well. So, just a couple notes. While fiber is generally regarded as very beneficial, as always, too much of anything isn't good. So, sometimes having things that are too high in fiber can leave you feeling too full for too long, might be a bit hard to digest, and that is not ideal. Um, and then just to touch on when you consume carbohydrates, your digestive system converts them into sugars, as we said, which is then absorbed into the bloodstream. And then as your blood sugar levels increase, your pancreas produces a hormone known as insulin. Insulin facilitates the transfer of sugar from the blood into the cells. So insulin is our regulator, and it allows the sugar to kind of go through into the cells, so then we can use that for energy. When we start to create problems with insulin and we start to see insulin resistance is when there's too much abuse of sugar. However, however, science has time and time again proven that actually it seems to be more on the stress of obesity and the cells rather than to do with the actual sugar spikes, especially when it comes to insulin resistance and obesity and type 2 diabetes. So, although it's good to know that, these things happen at the minute, it definitely seems that type 2 diabetes and any type of blood sugar spikes are more closely related to those who are obese or have a particular body fat percentage rather than someone who's fit and healthy because, your regulation is going to be a lot better. So, that's what the science says so far. So we're going to leave it at that and move on to the next one. So again, you know, for whatever reason, we don't always want to be spiking and abusing our blood sugar levels. Um, but our body is able to cope with that and deal with that if we do an exercise and we're staying fit and healthy. Just double check here, make sure I haven't missed anything from the notes. Um, yeah, so let's move on to the next one. And again, this is all dependent on individuals. For a large population, we are talking about, but everyone is an individual case, which is also a disclaimer that I want to throw out there. So, carbohydrates, why do we need them? So, carbohydrates, in the form of glucose, provides a fuel source for every cell in the body. Its preferred fuel is for the brain and the nervous system and heart, and is used for the muscles to support both aerobic and anaerobic activities. So, aerobic and anaerobic with air and without air um, or the oxygen, the oxidization of fuel. So glucose that's not needed immediately for energy is then converted into glycogen, which is our storage. So imagine glucose is the cash or what we're paying with cash in shops, and our glycogen is our bank account. So, oh, I don't need the cash right now because I'm not shopping for energy. I'm going to put it in the bank, and then that's when it becomes glycogen, and then that is when it is stored as energy in the liver and muscles. This produces one sufficient fuel to so the storage of glycogen fuels approximately 90 to 120 minutes of activity. Um, and it says there moderate to high intensity aerobic exercise. So once we kind of do more than 2 hours of exercise, or once we kind of start to look beyond an hour and a half of exercise, that's when we need to start considering some sort of fuel or some sort of replenishment to then keep us going and keeping us at optimal performance. Um, the rate at which my So, and again, so just for education purposes or just something to think about, and it's something that I always found fascinating, especially when we actually done these tests in university. The rate at which muscle glycogen is utilized in your blood, sorry, typo there, depends mainly on exercise intensity. So at low intensity, so when we're walking, for example, um, our muscles oxidize a mixture of fat and carbohydrates. So when you hear people say you burn more fat when you're walking, yeah, that's true. Um, because we're not engaging in any high activity exercise where we need a rapid source of energy. So our oxidation of fat is just our bodies are slowly just breaking down fat for energy because our bodies can do it at a much slower pace. It takes a long time to break down fat. Um, so when we're at low intensities of exercise, whether it be walking or, just moving, staying alive, we tend to use more fat as a fuel source. And there will be some carbohydrate as well. But then as that energy starts to increase, we start to use more carbohydrates. Um, and it then starts to become a dominant fuel. So fuels, the way our energy systems work, it always fluctuates. So there's never kind of like one specific thing. But generally, the higher the intensity of activity, the more carbohydrates, glycogen, glucose that we start to use. So therefore, if we're having a really intense workout and, what I want to now start, or hopefully we start to do, is we start to piece things together, right? So what I want us to do is think about what I've just said here. Let's say we do a really intense um, amount of exercise. Maybe we're doing half an hour cardio and an intense hour of, weight training. We're starting to look towards the 90 minutes. Okay, cool. 90 minutes, we start to break down into our glycogen stores. Those glycogen stores are then starting to deplete or get a little bit low. We then need to fuel the body. We need to fuel the body with the carbohydrates, the sugars, because we're not going to be able to get that from anywhere else. And this is when we talk about optimal performance and optimal recovery, is that carbohydrates are the best way to do that. Now, again, like I always say, our bodies aren't pieces of paper. They're not going to be blown over, and we're not going to die if we don't have carbohydrates. They're able to adapt, which is why we're able to go on all these different types of diets, which is why we're able to survive off keto, which is why we're able to survive off, all these different diet types where we cut out particular food groups. But if we're talking about optimal performance and overall, just everyday functioning and, not limiting ourselves, then carbohydrates is going to be the best for that. And our body is going to be a lot more happier for that as well. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Hopefully. And again, carbohydrates is probably the worst one to cover because it's a rabbit hole of things. Because like we could then go into activities. We could literally do a whole thing on monosaccharides. We could do a whole thing on disaccharides. We could do diabetes. It is a never ending story. So I'm just trying to keep it simple. And I'm just trying to talk about optimal performance. And I will go over a more specific one for performance. But again, just trying to keep it simple for carbohydrates. So this was a really nice graphic that I found online, just to kind of visualize things now, because there was a lot of text, a lot of talking. So hopefully I haven't lost everyone at this point. But we got starchy carbs. So as we said, our breads, our potatoes, rice, pulses. We've got our sugars. So our natural sugars coming from fruit and things like milk. And again, these are natural sugars. So when we talk about so in the UK, our recommendations are no more than 5% of our total energy, our total calorie intake should come from free sugars. So these natural sugars aren't included. So if you're having things like milk or fruit, that's not included with our kind of like recommendation of sugar. The recommendations of sugar is from added sugars. So when you're, putting sugars in your tea or honey, or if you're having fruit juices, um, where there's added sugar, that's when we start to look at, okay, we need to be careful. We need to reduce the amount of free sugars we're having, added sugars rather than the ones from natural, because we're probably going to have fiber in there to help balance things out. So when we are having carbohydrates, we just need to be careful where those carbohydrates are coming from and that we're picking the right options. But again, we just need to remember that this is fuel, and if we're exercising, then, fueling the body is better than not. And that brings us on to our last slide, where, because I know that carbohydrates is always going to be one that creates conversation, it's always going to be one that's going to create debate, in some cases, arguments. And look, I'm here for all different types of diets, whatever you believe in, I'm here for it. Which is why I actually studied nutrition, because I'm just here to find the best solution for you. So, like I said, on protein, if you're vegan, it's cool. Like, we just need to be aware of how can we supplement that and pair different proteins together so we actually get the most out of it. So if you're someone that doesn't like carbohydrates, it's cool. I'm just here to let you know that a balanced diet, you might have seen this Eat Well guide before, hopefully. Um, we need a balanced diet so that our body can, you know, run effectively, efficiently, and in the best way possible. So we need our fruits. And this is literally what our plate should look like. So when you're bringing a meal together, we need to think of a plate looking like this or somewhat close to this. So it says here 5 portions of fruit and veg. What I'm talking about is that the percentage wise. So it over the course of a day, we should be having about 50% of our calories coming from carbohydrates. I'm talking about the average person here, obviously. Um, Around about 50% of our energy should come from carbohydrates. And then, you know, on this plate, it's looking more like a 40. And then if we flip over to the other side, another 40 from fruits, vegetables. So we're getting our minerals in, we're getting our fiber in. And then from the other bits, the 20%, let's just say, from our proteins sources. Um, so that is kind of like a visual representation of what our plate should look like, where we should be getting our fuel sources from. But to specifically say carbohydrates, again, 50%, no more than 50% really, of our energy intake should come from carbohydrates. Um, we're talking about how many grams that is. Probably off the top of my head, it's probably aimed around, you know, if one carbohydrate equals 4 calories, and then the average person is having, let's just say, 2,000 calories a day, then obviously reverse engineer that. 1,000 calories is 50%. Divide that by, sorry, I'm going to do it the other way around, where it's easier for my brain to process. It would be about 300 grams of carbohydrates a day to hit your 50%. So, and then when we're talking about things like working out, so now I'm just trying to think about commonly asked questions. So how many carbs should I have before working out? 2 to 4 hours before any like intense activity or any activity. You want to make sure that you've fueled, you've had some sort of carbohydrates. So, you know, anywhere between 70 to probably about, oh God, we try and work it around body weight. So 1 to 1.5 or so um grams carbohydrate per body weight. So I would say a general rule of thumb for me would just be 60 grams. 60 to 70 grams of carbohydrates, 2 to 4 hours before a workout should see you through a decent workout. And then after that, we look at having a little bit more. Um, what does that look like? You know, for me personally, I would have any type of rice cake, um, or you know, a small plate of pasta, or if it's a jacket potato, before a workout, just to keep you going. Cereals, we do need to be careful of, obviously, depending on what type of cereal that is. Recommendations is obviously whole grain. A small bowl of cereal can also be good as well. And then because we've covered protein, shout out to protein as well. When we consume protein and carbohydrates together, it's a lot more beneficial for our recovery, muscle repair, and actual intensity of workouts as well. So if you are having some carbohydrates before your workouts, then make sure you pair it with protein as well. I think that's most of the common questions. Again, it's really difficult because carbohydrates is an absolute bombshell of a topic to cover. But I think I've covered the basics. And again, I need to know if you have any questions, like literally as I'm going through this, and you have any questions, hopefully you've just typed them down or you've commented as you go along, even if it's like a rage. Um, just let me know and we can have a talk about it, because at the end of the day, your performance is what's important. Your goals are what's important. And if you have anything around this that you need help with, you need to let me know. So for everyone that's in the coaching group, thanks for listening. And if you're from outside, welcome. Hopefully this helped. And let me know what your thoughts and feelings are behind carbohydrates. And if you need any more depth on anything else, let me know, because part 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is expected when it comes to carbohydrates. Thanks everyone for watching. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you leave a like, comment. If you're listening on Spotify, make sure you leave a 5 star and follow the podcast so you don't miss any of the new updates. And if you're from the coaching group, hopefully we have learned something new today. Thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.